Montana Territory. Late autumn, 1886. Nobody noticed what was happening in that limestone cave half a mile from the settlement. From the outside, it looked abandoned, another hollow in the hillside, the kind trappers used for a night and then forgot. But inside, something was changing, stone by stone, layer by layer. A woman was building what the valley would later call the room that shouldn't have worked. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't proving a theory. She was solving a problem that winter would make deadly. By the time people understood what she'd done, the worst blizzard in 20 years had already decided who was right. If you want to discover one survival technique every week that actually saved lives when it mattered most, hit that subscribe button right now. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one. September 1886. Bitterroot Valley, Montana Territory. Eleanor Pritchard wasn't supposed to be alone that autumn. Her husband had left in July to bring cattle down from Summer Range. A 3-week job that turned into silence. No word, no body, just the kind of disappearance the mountains swallowed without explanation. She had 2 children. Michael, 8 years old. Sarah, 5. A cabin with walls barely 6 inches thick. A firebox that ate wood faster than she could split it. And a winter coming that old-timers were already calling mean. The cabin sat exposed on a small rise. Good for summer ventilation, terrible for wind protection. The chinking between logs had gaps you could slide a knife through. The floor was dirt, and cold rose through it like water through sand. At night, even with the fire roaring, frost formed on the inside of the door. Michael coughed through September. A wet, deep cough that wouldn't clear. Sarah woke, crying from the cold, her lips pale, her fingers stiff. Eleanor kept the fire going, kept adding wood, kept watching her fuel pile shrink faster than the calendar moved. She did the math in her head every morning. Cords of wood, days until snow, temperature drop, hours of sleep she could afford to lose tending the fire. The numbers didn't work. Other families had better cabins, double-walled, banked with earth, fireplaces built by masons who understood draft and heat retention. She had a structure thrown together by a man in a hurry, designed for one summer, now facing a Montana winter with a widow and 2 children inside. She needed another option. Not to replace the cabin. She didn't have materials or time for that. Just a backup. A warmer place. Something that could hold heat when the cabin couldn't. One morning in early October, carrying water from the creek, she walked past the limestone outcrop at the base of the hill. She'd passed it 100 times. Ignored it 100 times. This time, she stopped. The opening was narrow, maybe 4 feet across. But inside, the cave widened. She stepped in, holding a pine branch torch. The ceiling rose to 8 feet. The walls were solid limestone, dry, stable. The floors sloped gently downward, then leveled. 30 feet deep, maybe more. She put her hand against the stone. Cool. Not cold. Not damp. Just cool. The kind of temperature that stayed constant, insulated by thousands of tons of rock and earth above. She stood there for a long time, thinking. Nobody else was going to solve this. No husband coming back. No neighbor offering to rebuild her cabin. No miracle supply of seasoned firewood. Just her, the cave, and a winter that wouldn't wait. Eleanor didn't announce what she was doing. She didn't ask permission. She just started. Every afternoon, after water was hauled and bread was baked and the children were occupied splitting kindling, she walked to the cave with tools, a shovel, a hammer, a chisel salvaged from the cabin's small tool cache. The first week, she cleared the floor. Rocks, debris, animal droppings, anything loose. She hauled it out in a canvas sack, dumped it downhill, came back for more. The floor became level, clean, workable. The second week, she began shaping the entrance. The problem with caves is cold air. It sinks. It pools. It sits at the opening like water in a bucket, and every time you walk through, you let warm air out and cold air in. Eleanor had seen root cellars fail for exactly this reason. Good insulation, bad entry design. She built a baffle wall. For feet inside the cave mouth, she stacked flat limestone rocks, pieces she could carry, fit together without mortar, wedge-tight using smaller stones as shims. The wall rose to 5 feet, leaving a 2-foot gap at the top for ventilation. She curved it inward, creating an airlock effect. Cold air would hit the wall, pool at the entrance, but wouldn't flood the interior. Warm air would rise, circulate, stay trapped deeper in the cave. It took her 3 days to get it right. No one saw her do it. Inside, she marked out the living space. 12 feet back from the baffle wall. That's where she'd build the core, the sleeping platform, the heat source. She gathered flat stones from the creek, sandstone mostly because it split clean and stacked stable. She carried them up in a canvas sling, 20 pounds at a time, until her shoulders ached and her hands bled through the calluses. The platform went against the back wall, elevated 18 inches off the cave floor. 3 feet wide, 6 feet long. Enough for her and both children. The elevation mattered. Cold air stays low, warm air rises. Sleeping on the ground meant sleeping in the coldest layer. Sleeping elevated meant staying in the thermal zone. Underneath the platform, she built a firebox. Small, efficient. Not the roaring fireplace the cabin had, but a concentrated heat source designed to do one thing: warm thermal mass. The firebox was 2 feet wide, 18 inches deep, lined with firestones she'd collected from old campfire rings. She angled the back wall to reflect heat upward into the stone platform above. She left a narrow, flue channel running along the cave wall to the entrance, venting smoke without venting heat. Then came the critical part, the part that would decide whether this worked or failed. She packed clay around the firebox, thick, insulating clay from the creek bank, mixed with dry grass for binding. She let it dry for 2 days. Then she packed more clay underneath the sleeping platform, filling gaps between stones, creating a solid thermal mass. For 1,000 pounds of stone and clay, maybe more, stone holds heat. Slow to warm, slow to cool. Light a fire beneath it, and the heat doesn't vanish when the flame dies. It sinks into the mass, radiates back for hours. All night if you do it right. She carved ventilation into the cave ceiling. A narrow crack she widened with the chisel, leading up through fractured limestone to the surface. Smoke would rise, vent naturally, pull fresh air from the entrance. No choking, no backdraft. She lined the sleeping platform with split logs, then with a wool blanket, then with a bearskin a trapper had traded her for bread 2 summers ago. Insulation below, insulation above, stone radiating heat from beneath. The whole structure was invisible from outside. Just another cave, just another hole in the hillside. She told Michael and Sarah it was a winter room, a place they might stay if the cabin got too cold. They looked at her like she was speaking another language. By late November, it was finished. She tested it once, built a small fire in the firebox, let burn for 2 hours, then let it die. She stayed inside with the children, measuring time by counting heartbeats. 6 hours after the fire went out, the platform was still warm. The air inside stayed above 50 degrees. Outside, frost was forming on the grass. She didn't tell anyone. People noticed, of course. You can't haul stones up a hillside for 6 weeks without someone seeing. Tobias Mercer, the valley's senior carpenter, rode past one afternoon in mid-November. He saw Eleanor coming out of the cave, arms full of clay-covered rags, face streaked with dust. He reined his horse, stared, then laughed. Not cruel, just bemused. Living like a bear now, Eleanor. She didn't answer, just nodded and kept walking. He shook his head and rode on. That night, at the settlement's small trading post, he told the story. Pritchard woman's dug herself a den, got her kids sleeping in a cave like animals. People chuckled, sympathetic mostly. Poor widow, losing her mind from grief and isolation. Doing strange things because she didn't have a man to keep her focused. No one was angry. No one tried to stop her. It was just peculiar. Gideon Foster, who ran the lumber supply and considered himself an expert on frontier construction, visited her cabin in early December under the pretense of checking if she needed firewood. "Heard you've been working on something up the hill," he said, casual, like he was asking about the weather. Eleanor offered him coffee. Didn't elaborate. "Cave living," he continued, leaning against the cabin wall. "That's old. Real old. Indians did it, sure. But we've moved past that, Eleanor. Cabins are better. Warmer. Safer. You're spending effort on something that's already been improved. She sipped her coffee. Cabin's cold, Gideon. Stone holds heat. That's just physics. He smiled, a patient, condescending smile. Stone's cold, Eleanor. That's why we don't build houses out of it here. You want warmth, you want wood. You want tight chinking and a big firebox. I could help you fix up your cabin proper, if you'd like. I appreciate it, she said. But I'm fine. He left, shaking his head. The women at the settlement were kinder, but equally doubtful. Martha Hodge, who'd helped Eleanor with the children after her husband disappeared, brought over a basket of preserves in mid-December. You working yourself too hard, Eleanor? Just preparing. For what? Winter. Martha glanced toward the hillside. You know we'd take you in if the cabin gets too cold, right? You and the kids. You don't have to live in a hole in the ground. Eleanor smiled. Thanked her. Didn't explain. By late December, most of the valley had heard about the cave project. It became a quiet joke. Not mean-spirited. Just the kind of thing people mention and move on from. Pritchard woman's got her bear den ready. Wonder if she'll hibernate till spring. Strange what grief does to people. Eleanor heard the comments. Ignored them. She had one priority, keeping her children alive. If that meant being strange, so be it. She stocked the cave with essentials. Firewood, small, dry pieces that burned hot and fast. A water jug, blankets, a small pot for heating food, a lantern, a knife. She showed Michael and Sarah how to get there in the dark. Counted the steps. Taught them the layout. If I tell you to go to the winter room, you go. No questions. Understand. They nodded, wide-eyed, not understanding. By December 20th, the cave was ready. Fully stocked. Fully insulated. Waiting. 3 days later, the sky turned gray and stayed that way. December 23rd, 1886. Morning. The air pressure dropped like a stone. Eleanor felt it before she saw it. That heavy, pressing silence that comes before big weather. The kind of quiet where birds stop singing and animals move to shelter without being told. She checked the cabin's firewood supply. 2 days, maybe 3 if she rationed. She checked the cave. For days, easy, and that was burning conservatively. By noon, the wind started. Not the usual gust that came and went. This was steady, relentless, cutting across the valley from the north like a blade. It stripped heat from every surface it touched. Within 2 hours, the temperature dropped 15 degrees. By evening, snow was falling. Thick, heavy flakes that didn't drift, they drove horizontal, piling against the north side of the cabin, finding every gap in the chinking, every crack around the door. Eleanor built up the cabin fire. Fed it, kept it roaring. The children huddled near the hearth, wrapped in blankets. By midnight, the temperature inside the cabin was 45 degrees. Outside, it had dropped to 10 above zero. The fire was eating wood faster than she'd calculated. She added more. The heat rose toward the rafters and leaked out through gaps she couldn't see. The floor stayed frozen. Frost climbed the inside walls. Michael's cough came back, harsh and wet. Sarah shivered so hard her teeth chattered. Eleanor made the decision. Get dressed. Warm clothes. Everything. What? Michael asked. We're going to the winter room. She packed quickly. Blankets, food, water, the children. She wrapped Sarah in a wool coat 2 sizes too big, pulled Michael's hat down over his ears. The walk to the cave was 70 yards. In summer, it took 2 minutes. That night, against the wind, in the dark, it felt like miles. The snow stung her face. The wind tried to pull Sarah from her arms. Michael stumbled, got up, kept moving. When they reached the cave entrance, Eleanor pushed through the narrow opening, past the baffle wall, into the interior. The difference was immediate. No wind, no snow, no biting cold. Just still, cool air, 40 degrees, maybe 45. Warm compared to outside. Comfortable compared to the cabin. She set the children on the sleeping platform, wrapped them in blankets. Then she built a fire in the firebox. Small sticks first. Kindling. Dry bark. She blew gently, coaxed the flame, added larger pieces. The fire caught, grew, filled the firebox with steady heat. She didn't build it large. Didn't need to. The heat wasn't escaping. It was sinking into the stone, spreading through the platform, radiating back. Within an hour, the platform was warm to the touch. The children stopped shivering. Michael's breathing eased. Sarah fell asleep. Her face finally relaxed. Eleanor added one more log, then let the fire settle. She didn't need it roaring, just steady. The thermal mass would do the rest. Outside, the blizzard intensified. Wind howled across the valley. Snow buried the cabin door. Temperatures plunged to 20 below zero. Inside the cave, the temperature held at 58 degrees. Stay with me, because when the neighbor checked on them 3 days later, the number he measured humiliated every expert in the valley. Eleanor used 4 pieces of firewood that first night. 4. The same amount that would have burned in the cabin's fireplace in under an hour. The fire died around 2 a.m. She didn't relight it. She lay down next to the children, pulled the bearskin over them, and felt the stone beneath still radiating heat. By morning, the platform was still warm. The air inside the cave was still 55 degrees. Outside, the storm had settled into a relentless, grinding cold. 22 below zero. Wind chill beyond calculation. Eleanor rebuilt the fire. Small, controlled. Let burn for 3 hours, then let it die. The pattern repeated. 12 hours of radiant heat from 3 hours of burning. The stone worked exactly as she'd planned. Slow to heat, slow to cool, holding energy long after the flame disappeared. The children played on the platform, ate bread and dried meat, told stories, didn't cough, didn't shiver. The cave had become what she designed it to be, a thermal battery, a shelter that worked with physics instead of fighting it. On the second day, the storm worsened. Snowdrifts buried the cabin to the roofline. The trading post recorded 30 below zero. Families across the valley huddled in their homes, burning wood as fast as they could split it, fighting to keep temperatures above freezing. Eleanor used 6 pieces of firewood that day. Total. On the third day, December 26th, Gideon Foster forced his way through the drifts to check on the Pritchard cabin. He expected to find them frozen, maybe dead, at minimum, desperate. The cabin was empty, cold, abandoned. He followed the faint tracks up the hillside, past the limestone outcrop to the cave entrance. He called her name. Eleanor appeared at the opening, Sarah in her arms, Michael behind her. All 3 were dry, warm, calm. Gideon stared. You been in there? The whole storm? Yes. How cold is it inside? She stepped aside. Come see. He ducked through the entrance, past the baffle wall, into the interior. Warm air. Not hot, not stuffy, just warm, comfortable, dry. He looked at the sleeping platform, the firebox, the ventilation channel, the thermal mass, the careful design that everyone had dismissed as peculiar. He put his hand on the stone. Still warm. No fire burning. What's the temperature? He asked. Eleanor had a mercury thermometer she'd kept from her husband's surveying kit. She held it up. 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, it was 28 below zero. A 90-degree difference, maintained with less than most families burned in 3 hours. Gideon stood there in silence. Then he spoke, quietly, almost himself. I'll be damned. Gideon Foster didn't leave the cave that day. He stayed, measured, observed, tried to understand what he was seeing. He counted the firewood Eleanor had used. 11 pieces total across 3 days. Small splits, the kind you'd burn through in an hour trying to heat a drafty cabin. He checked the firebox. Cold ash. No active fire. Yet the stone platform radiated warmth like a banked coal stove. How long since you last burned wood? He asked. Eleanor glanced at the children. This morning. Maybe 6 hours ago. 6 hours. The platform was still warm enough to sleep on comfortably. The air temperature inside the cave hadn't dropped below 55 degrees. Gideon did the math in his head. His own cabin, well-built, double-walled, with a stone fireplace he'd paid a mason to construct, required constant feeding. Every 3 hours, minimum, or the temperature plummeted. On a night like this, he'd burn through 20 pieces of wood easy, just to keep his family from freezing. Eleanor had used 11 pieces in 3 days. The stone, he said, more statement than question. Thermal mass, Eleanor replied. Heats slow, cools slow, holds energy. The cave insulates it. The platform radiates it back. The firebox only needs to run a few hours to charge the whole system. Gideon touched the limestone wall. Cool, but not cold. Stable. Insulated by millions of pounds of earth and rock above, maintaining a baseline temperature that never swung to extremes. And the smoke? Eleanor pointed to the ventilation channel she'd carved along the ceiling. Rises naturally, vents through the crack to the surface. Fresh air pulls in from the entrance, past the baffle wall, circulates, and pushes smoke out. No backdraft, no build-up. He looked at the baffle wall, the curved stone barrier near the entrance that he'd barely noticed coming in. That's to stop cold air. Cold air sinks. Without the wall, it would flood the whole cave every time we open the entrance. With it, cold air pools at the entry. Warm air stays deep. Gideon had built houses for 15 years. He'd worked with experienced carpenters, learned from masons, followed every standard practice the frontier had developed. And here was a widow with no formal training, using principles he'd never considered, achieving results he couldn't match. I need to tell people about this, he said. Eleanor shrugged. Tell them if you want. I just needed my children warm. He left that afternoon, walking back through snow that had finally stopped falling. The valley was buried, drifts 10 feet high in places. The sky was clearing, and the temperature was dropping again, the kind of cold that comes after storms, when the air is still and the earth radiates heat into a cloudless void. That night, at the trading post, Gideon told the story. Not as a joke this time, as a report. 62 degrees inside, 28 below outside, 90-degree difference. Less than 4 pieces of wood per day. People listened, some skeptical, some curious. Stone doesn't hold heat, someone said. Stone's cold. Stone holds heat better than wood, Gideon replied. It just takes longer to warm up. But once it's warm, it stays warm. For hours. Eleanor figured that out, built her whole system around it. And it works. I measure it myself. Saw her children. Dry, warm, comfortable. While we're burning through cords of wood just to keep frost off the walls. The conversation shifted. People started asking questions. Practical questions. How thick was the stone? How big was the firebox? How did the ventilation work? Where did she get the clay? By the next morning, 3 men had walked up to Eleanor's cave to see it for themselves. She showed them, explained the design, answered questions, didn't preach, didn't boast, just described what she'd built and why. One of the men was Jacob Whitmore, a stonemason who'd worked on half the chimneys in the valley. He studied the firebox, the platform, the baffle wall, ran his hands over the joints. Clean work, he said. Real clean. You do this yourself? Yes. No mortar? Didn't need it. Friction fit. Clay seal on the firebox. Everything else is just weight and geometry. Jacob nodded slowly. I've built systems like this before. Back east. Russians use them. Finns. They call them masonry heaters. Heat the mass, let it radiate. But I've never seen one adapted to a cave like this. Caves are natural insulators, Eleanor said. Seemed like a waste not to use that. Jacob looked at Gideon. She's right. We've been fighting the environment. She's working with it. The storm broke on December 28th. Temperatures climbed back to 0, then 10 above. The valley dug itself out. Families assessed damage. Frozen pipes, cracked walls, livestock losses, children sick from a cold. Eleanor's family was fine. Michael's cough had cleared. Sarah was energetic, playing in the snow. Eleanor herself looked rested. The first time in months anyone had seen her without dark circles under her eyes. Martha Hodge visited, bringing soup and bread. She stood in the cave entrance, staring at the interior. I owe you an apology, she said. I thought you'd lost your mind. Eleanor smiled. I know. How'd you figure this out? I didn't figure it out. I just paid attention. Stone holds heat. Cave stays stable. Fire heats stone. Stone heats air. It's not complicated. People just forgot to think about it, or never thought about it in the first place. Eleanor shrugged. Most folks here came from places where wood was easy and caves were rare. Makes sense they'd build the way they learned. But wood's scarce here. Caves aren't. Seemed worth trying. Martha looked at the sleeping platform, the firebox, the careful design that had kept 3 people alive through the worst cold in 20 years. You saved your children, she said quietly. That's all I was trying to do. Word spread. The way word spreads in small communities. Not through announcements, but through conversations, visits, observations. By early January, a dozen families had walked up the hillside to see the cave. Eleanor showed them all, explained the principles, offered advice. Some people took notes. Some people just looked. Some people left skeptical but thoughtful. By mid-January, the first adaptation appeared. Richard Hastings owned a homestead 5 miles south. He had a root cellar, deep, stone-lined, built into a hillside for food storage. After visiting Eleanor's cave, he saw something he'd missed before: potential. The cellar stayed cool in summer, warm in winter. The same thermal stability Eleanor had used. It was bigger than her cave, with a higher ceiling and thicker walls. If he added a firebox, a sleeping platform, proper ventilation. He started building in late January, finished in early February, tested it during a cold snap in mid-February. Worked exactly like Eleanor's. Maybe better, because his stone walls were thicker and his space was larger. He told his neighbors. His neighbors visited. 2 of them had similar root cellars. They made modifications, added platforms, improved ventilation, built small, efficient fireboxes designed to heat mass, not air. By March, 6 families in the valley had winter rooms, cave adaptations, cellar adaptations, dugout adaptations. Each one different, each one following the same core principle: work with thermal mass, not against it. Jacob Whitmore, the stonemason, started getting requests. Can you build me one of those heating platforms? Can you design a firebox like Eleanor's? Can you carve ventilation like she did? He took the jobs, but he always sent people to Eleanor first. Go see the original, he'd say. Understand why it works before you copy it. Eleanor became an informal consultant. Not paid, not formal, just available. People would stop by, ask questions, get advice. She'd walk them through the principles, show them the details, help them adapt the design to their specific situation. Every cave is different, she'd say. Every cellar, every dugout. You can't just copy mine. You have to understand the idea, then build what fits your space. The technique spread organically. No grand announcement, no official adoption. Just practical people solving practical problems using a method that worked. By April, when the snow finally melted and spring arrived, the valley had changed. Not visibly. No new buildings, no dramatic construction. But culturally, practically, people talked about thermal mass now, about ventilation design, about working with the environment instead of fighting it, about the value of old techniques adapted to new circumstances. And they talked about Eleanor Pritchard, not as the strange widow who lived like a bear, but as the woman who'd figured out what everyone else had missed. Summer 1887. Bitterroot Valley, Montana Territory. Eleanor moved back to the cabin in May, once the temperatures stabilized and the risk of cold snaps passed. The cave became what it was always meant to be: a backup, a winter room, a shelter for when the cabin wasn't enough. But she didn't abandon it. She maintained it, restocked it, improved it. She added a second ventilation channel for better air circulation. She reinforced the baffle wall with additional stones. She built a small storage alcove for firewood, keeping it dry and accessible. She carved a drainage channel along the cave floor to prevent any moisture buildup during spring thaw. The cave wasn't just functional anymore. It was refined, optimized, a testament to iterative improvement based on real-world testing. Other families did the same. The winter rooms that had been hastily built in late winter were improved in summer. Platforms were expanded. Fireboxes were redesigned. Ventilation was enhanced. Jacob Whitmore developed a standardized firebox design based on Eleanor's original, a modular system that could be adapted to different cave sizes and stone types. He taught it to 2 apprentices. They taught it to others. By autumn 1887, 11 homesteads within 50 miles had incorporated some version of Eleanor's thermal mass system. Not all were caves. Some were cellars. Some were hillside dugouts. One was a partially buried shed with stone walls and an earth roof. But they all followed the same core principles: thermal mass, controlled ventilation, efficient heat sources, working with natural insulation instead of fighting it. The technique wasn't called Eleanor's method or given any formal name. It was just called winter room building, or sometimes cave heating, and it became part of the valley's collective knowledge, something people knew how to do, passed down through demonstration and explanation, adapted to individual circumstances. In November 1887, another hard winter arrived. Not as severe as 1886, but cold enough to test the new systems. They worked, all of them. Families that had spent previous winters burning through cords of wood, struggling to maintain livable temperatures, fighting constant cold. They now had backup options. Warm spaces, thermal refuges that required minimal fuel and provided maximum comfort. Child illness dropped. Fuel consumption dropped. Stress dropped. The valley survived the winter of 1887 better than any winter before it. Not because the weather was milder, it wasn't, but because people had learned to build smarter. Eleanor's role in that shift was understood, but not celebrated. She didn't want celebration. She'd solved a problem for her family, shared the solution when asked, and moved on with her life. In spring 1888, a surveyor from Helena passed through the valley, documenting homesteads and settlements for territorial records. He noticed the winter rooms, unusual structures, not standard frontier architecture. He asked about them. People told him the story, pointed him toward Eleanor. He interviewed her, took notes, sketched the cave design, asked if she'd ever considered publishing her method. She laughed. "It's not my method. It's just physics. People have been heating with stone for thousands of years. I just remembered to pay attention." "But you adapted it," the surveyor said. "Made it work here, in these conditions, with these materials. That's innovation." Eleanor shrugged. "I had children to keep warm. That's motivation." The surveyor included Eleanor's cave in his report, filed with the territorial government in July 1888. The report was archived, read by a few officials, then forgotten in the bureaucratic shuffle of a growing territory. But the technique wasn't forgotten. It stayed in the valley, spread to neighboring valleys, moved with families who relocated, adapted to new regions, evolved with new materials and new circumstances. By 1890, thermal mass heating systems, adapted from Eleanor's original cave design, were present in scattered homesteads across Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. Not common, not widespread, but known, available, part of the repertoire of survival techniques that frontier families carried with them. Eleanor herself continued living in the Bitterroot Valley until her death in 1903. She remarried in 1889, a quiet ceremony, a practical partnership with a widower who respected her independence and valued her competence. They raised her children in his, worked the land, survived the hard years, and enjoyed the good ones. The cave remained, used every winter, maintained every summer, passed down to Michael when Eleanor died, then to Michael's children, then to their children. In 1952, Michael's granddaughter, a schoolteacher named Catherine, documented the cave's history for a local heritage project. She interviewed elderly residents who remembered Eleanor, collected oral histories, measured the original structure. The cave was still functional. The stone platform still radiated heat. The ventilation still worked. The design, 70 years old, remained sound. Catherine's report noted, Eleanor Pritchard wasn't trying to change the world. She was trying to survive a Montana winter with 2 children and limited resources. But by paying attention to physics, materials, and environment, she created a solution that outlasted her by generations. Not because it was complicated, but because it was correct. The report ended with a reflection. She wasn't being radical. She was being practical. And sometimes, that's the most revolutionary thing you can be. The cave still exists today. Partially collapsed, overgrown, no longer used. But recognizable. The stone platform is still there. The firebox is still visible. The baffle wall, though crumbled, shows the curve Eleanor designed to trap cold air and preserve warmth. It's a monument to a simple idea. When resources are scarce and survival is urgent, innovation doesn't come from complexity. It comes from observation, adaptation, and the courage to trust what works, even when everyone else says it won't. Eleanor Pritchard built a bedroom in a cave because she needed her children to survive the winter. She didn't expect recognition, didn't seek fame, didn't claim expertise. She just paid attention to stone, fire, and air. And in doing so, she created something that lasted long after the blizzard melted and the critics fell silent. That's the lesson. Not that caves are better than cabins. Not that old methods are superior to new ones. But that survival wisdom comes from understanding principles, not following traditions. From observing how heat moves, how materials behave, how environments function. Eleanor understood that. The valley learned it. And anyone facing a hard winter with limited resources can learn it too. Because the physics hasn't changed. Stone still holds heat. Caves still insulate. Fire still warms mass. And people still need shelter when the cold comes. The only question is whether we're paying attention. Where are you watching from? And what's the coldest winter you've ever survived? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if this story taught you something about survival wisdom that actually works, hit that like button and subscribe. Every week, we uncover another technique that saved lives when it mattered most. Educational note. This video presents historically inspired reconstructions for educational and storytelling purposes. Characters, names, and specific events are fictional, while the techniques, concepts, and principles discussed are based on real historical practices and well-established physical or practical knowledge. Any modern application should be evaluated according to current standards, safety guidelines, and applicable laws or regulations. This content is educational in nature and does not constitute professional, technical, or legal advice.